and just to be able to distribute that to anyone that wasn't able to attend today. I'd like to very much say thank you for attending. It's really exciting, and it's a great way, I guess, with all the difficulties of COVID, one of the great ways is that we can connect in new and different ways. And one of these ways is, giving you guys as students access to talk to people who are have kind of traveled down their career path a bit of the way, and so they can share those experiences with you guys when you're just about to embark on them. And Michael's a great, fantastic example of that. Michael's a criminal lawyer and has been working with the Victorian Legal Aid, did the New Lawyers program, and has some really, I've been talking to Michael since I've started, and he's got some really interesting stories and really tangible pieces of advice he can give you guys. And we can start off now. So welcome, Michael.
Thanks, Millie. That's quite the intro. I feel like everyone's expectations have been raised.
No, you've got it. No, we're excited to have you. So I'll start off with the first question. Why did you choose to study law?
Why did I choose to study law? Look, I wasn't one of those people who grew up always wanting to study law. It's not something that I'd considered in high school. I didn't grow up in a legal household. I think the closest reference I had to a lawyer growing up was Law and Order. In fact, when I finished year 12, I was certain of two things. One was that I was going to move out of Canberra, and the other was that I was going to be a social worker. But in my first semester of social work at Monash University, I did a compulsory Indigenous Studies unit. And that exposed me to things like land rights, Mabo, native title, and these were things that I hadn't really been exposed to much in high school, and that really opened my eyes and I found really interesting. And yeah, from there I started considering law, and the uni administration at Monash had actually staffed up my enrolment, which is something that I think is universal across all universities. Every student ever will have some experience of uni administration being a headache, and mine came right at the beginning of my degree. But it was actually a blessing in disguise. At the end of my first year, I had to apply to be enrolled in arts social work again. But it gave me the opportunity to pause and think about what I really wanted to do. And I chose to transfer into arts law instead. And so, yeah, I guess I chose law because I was interested in being a native title lawyer. But now, as you mentioned in the intro, I'm a criminal lawyer, so that didn't last too long. But I've always kind of followed my nose and followed what's the most exciting thing to do at the time, and I think that's why I ended up in crime.
Yeah, fantastic. It's funny when you think about native title law as well, and you learn about it. It's so different in practice, like many things, to what you actually, I guess, attach to it when you start learning about it. So, what has tell us about what your career journey has been since you've graduated from law.
Yeah, look, my career journey definitely started before I graduated. So again, I was pretty convinced that I was going to be a native title lawyer. So after I completed the clinical placement unit at Monash, which was at Springvale Monash Legal Service, sought out the native title legal service in North Melbourne, but they weren't accepting volunteers. So I went to the next best option. I went to the Victorian Aboriginal Legal Service, and that's where I met Jill Pryor, who's now the director of the Law and Advocacy Centre for Women, which is co-located with us at CIJ. She was working as the principal legal officer at VALS at the time. Anyway, she gave me a gig as a volunteer, and I volunteered there for 12 months. I really threw myself into everything that they gave me. And at the end of that 12-month process, there was an opportunity to do an Aurora placement. Aurora is a program that still exists, I'm pretty sure, that you can be sent out to remote communities, and it's one of the main pathways to be a native title lawyer. But at the same time as I was accepted into that program, a paralegal job came up at VALS, and I was lucky enough to be successful, and I started working full time while completing my degree. So I started in the civil law team, where we did some really, really interesting things. Civil law team at VALS at that time was me and 2 lawyers. So it was, yeah, I had a lot of exposure as a paralegal to legal practice, which was probably a bit naughty, probably something I shouldn't say on a recorded lecture. But anyway, it's one of the benefits of volunteering and working in community legal centres is you definitely get exposure to a lot of stuff that maybe would have taken years and years for you to be exposed to in private settings. And then from the civil team, I moved over to the criminal law team. I was a paralegal in the criminal law team. I ended up managing the volunteer program. And then I went to work for the peak body for the Aboriginal Legal Services, NATSLs, during the 2016 election campaign. NATSLs was based at VALS, so really I was still at VALS, but just changed cubicles. And that was really a big experience that exposed me to lots of different things as well. It was the first time in my life that I heard the phrase, we'll take this offline, which is now, you know, painful and happens all the time. But yeah, from there, I applied for the New Lawyers program at Legal Aid and was accepted into the New Lawyers program. And that's something that if people here are interested in pursuing a career in criminal law or community law, family law, the Legal Aid's New Lawyers program is a fantastic program. It really is the best possible start to your career at Legal Aid. You're guaranteed an ongoing position at the end of the program. You get put on all different areas around the organisation. I worked in the Dandenong office, the Bendigo office, the city office. I stayed the whole time in crime, but there's the opportunity to move into their civil teams, to try a hand at family law as well. So yeah, I was really lucky. It's a very competitive program, the New Lawyers program. But if anyone is interested in that type of career path, I really, really recommend having a look at it.
Yeah, I've just posted a poll on the chat if anyone can access the chat, and it's just asked guys, have you heard of the Victoria Legal Aid's New Lawyers program? Because you can either click yes or no and then submit, because it's a really valuable program. It's not your classic PLT course, is it? They have different requirements.
No, absolutely not. Yeah, so you actually have to be an admitted lawyer to apply, to be accepted. So I applied, I think, when I was still doing my PLT, but it's open to applicants with up to 2 years practicing experience. So it's not a graduate program as such. It's more a new lawyers program, quite literally. And it's, you know, we had people who were mature age entries, you know, lots of people my age going into it as well. It was great. It was actually a really diverse group of people in the cohort that went into it, and we all did really excellent professional development training all together, and we, you know, formed a little unit, nice group of friends.
Yeah, great. And so I guess from there, have there been any defining moments in your career?
Defining moments in my career. Look, I've had lots of defining moments in my career. I've been really lucky. My career is not very long, but I think there's lots of things that have really shaped the way I've thought about my career, but also the way I look at the world. And I think that's one of the real benefits of practicing in crime and also practicing in community law is that you have exposure to people and to situations that, you know, thought-provoking, they're interesting and they're challenging, and that's the reason you get into this type of law. To pick two that have been quite defining for me was when I was still at VALS in the civil law team. I worked on a coronial inquest, and I remember fighting to get legal aid funding so we could hire a barrister to appear for a family member as an interested party in the coronial inquest, and it was really, really hard to get funding, and the funding that we eventually got was so inadequate. We lost our first barrister because it wasn't enough money for them. We eventually essentially had a barrister do it as a favour for us. He took quite a significant financial hit doing the inquest. And I remember walking into the coroner's court on the first day of the hearings after me and my colleague had stayed up. We'd been pulling crazy hours to prepare for this inquest. The brief was, I think, 8 boxes of files, and we had to go through it forensically and pick all the different lines of argument we wanted to run and kinds of findings that we wanted to recommend in the eventual report. So it was a huge amount of work, and I had no reference point for what the other parties would be doing. It was my first kind of experience of this, and we walked into the coroner's court, and corrections had Silk, a junior barrister, and a top tier law firm. Same goes for Victoria Police, same goes for the Vic government. And it was really a moment of opening my eyes and saying, wow, like this is how much money and resources the government will put protecting its own arse, and this is how much money they'll give someone trying to hold them to account. And it was really quite glaring, and that at a very early point in my career shaped the type of law I wanted to practice in, and kind of turned me into a plaintiff lawyer, such that I am, I guess, criminal lawyer is effectively a plaintiff lawyer. The other experience that I guess defined my career was just before I left legal aid to come to CIJ, I did 4 months in the Wimmera. So the Wimmera is Horsham to the north and the west. Horsham's halfway to Adelaide is the best way to describe it. There's not a lot going on out there, lots of wheat fields, lots of big empty spaces, lots of tiny little towns. And I was the senior lawyer out there for 4 months, and there was periods of time where I was the only lawyer with a indictable practicing, so someone who could take on an indictable crime matter north of Ararat. And that was quite daunting, and it was a very different experience practicing as a lawyer in such a rural setting. It was the one magistrate at every court. I would go and I'd be the only lawyer, and we had this kind of very strained relationship, and we would turn up at courthouses that looked like they were out of a storybook, but it would be me and representing every single person who turned up, trying to get the people out of jail, and then I had to do the child protection work. So from a practicing perspective, it was great. I was exposed to all these different types of matters, different areas of the law. It was extremely challenging, very isolating. But during that period, I represented a lot of clients that have really stayed with me, including a number of clients with cognitive disabilities. And in the Wimmera and also further south towards Ararat, there's a lot of intergenerational trauma, a lot of intergenerational disability and poverty, real poverty. And the manifestation of that poverty was criminalisation. A lot of these families were just too hard to deal with. The local police targeted them, and they just kept on coming back to court for petty matters. And when I was in Horsham, it was right after the changes to the Bail Act came. So I saw a lot of these relatively young kids with borderline intellectual disabilities, quite severe acquired brain injuries for petty matters, but because they had so many of them, just being locked up and getting custodial sentences because there was really no service responses out there for them. And that was really frustrating and lit a bit of a fire in my belly. And after that experience, I had the opportunity to come to the CIJ and shepherd the Supporting Justice project came up. And that's what led me to doing what I am doing now, which is trying to find ways to improve the system so people with cognitive disabilities don't find themselves in quagmires of misery in the criminal justice system. So, yeah.
There's a shocking stat on how many people in prison have acquired brain injuries. It's like 44%.
Yeah, so it's,
is that right?
42% of males and 33% of females in Victoria's prisons have acquired brain injuries.
Yeah.
that's a figure that's from 2011. So I think it'd probably be higher now, given the changes to the bail laws and things like that. Yeah, it's a pretty shocking number. And it's something that we've known for a long time. It's actually, some of the things that I find shocking about it is that we know there's such an overrepresentation, but it's not a statistical point that we measure. The fact that we have that statistic is a one-off study that was done by the Department of Justice in 2011, but it's not data that the government collects. Certainly when you look at the justice system and the way that the magistrates courts run, with the exception of ARC, which is really the only exception. The ARC is the Assessment and Referral Court for anyone who's interested. Yeah, with the exception of that court, it really doesn't run in any way that supports the participation, that supports the understanding of people with cognitive impairments moving through the system. And such a high proportion of people, if they don't have a cognitive impairment, probably have quite severe mental health conditions going on, or at least they're in a period of crisis. And I think there's a lot that could be done, which is relatively low-hanging fruit, that could improve the justice system and really have huge benefits, not only for the people moving through the justice system, but the broader community, if we improve the justice system so people understand what goes on in a courtroom. Because at the moment, it's pretty shocking. If most people would find it shocking if you went and sat in court one COVID-19 day and watched the way that magistrates and lawyers interact in front of their clients.
Yeah. And so I guess reflecting on those defining moments and reflecting on your own career path from graduating to university to where you are now, what have been the biggest career challenges that you've come up against?
Yeah, it's a really tough question. I think, like most careers in the law, finding balance has been the biggest challenge for me personally, and it's an ongoing challenge. It's not something I have all the answers to, but finding balance between wanting to do the best thing for your client and the obligations you might have to your organisation, particularly if you work for a statutory organisation like Victoria Legal Aid, that can be really challenging. So balancing the organisation versus your client, balancing your obligations to the court and your client, being confronted and being put in situations where there aren't enough resources or there isn't enough time to do the job that you really want to do and that your client deserves. And I think I gave the example of the coronial inquest, and that's a pretty good example. Like, you want to give it everything, but it's just there's these structural things in the way of you being able to do the best job for your client. And then having that as your baseline, and then having things like funding cuts come through or funding not being increased, and that can be really challenging as well. So there's lots of things practicing in this area that can be really challenging, and finding the balance to make sure that you're looking after your home life and your mental health, and you're still going to work with energy to do the best job you can for your clients. That's really hard, and that's a challenge that I think most criminal lawyers in particular grapple with, but most community lawyers, I would say, grapple with absolutely.
Absolutely, especially as a duty lawyer, I think that would really ring true. I don't know if everyone in this meeting knows what a duty lawyer does, but it's basically a court-appointed lawyer where if someone attends court because they've been charged with something and they're not represented, they haven't had time to call VLA, or they haven't, or they've only gotten advice from a community legal centre and it's only advice, they can't be represented. A VLA lawyer is on duty that day to see anyone who has a hearing that day to represent them in court. So it's like a very high pressure, fast paced way of legal service delivery, especially if you're, I guess, early in your career and also working in Horsham, seeing everything coming your way as well.
or sitting in Edenhope, which is even smaller than Horsham. Yeah, no, absolutely. Duty lawyers, they play a really important function in the way that our justice system operates. They're effectively the emergency room of our justice system. They do a lot of triage work, but for, I think maybe a very small proportion of people who end up in custody wouldn't see the duty lawyer. But most people who go into custody, the first person they would see who isn't a police officer or a correctional staff member would be a duty lawyer. They might then ask for their regular lawyer, but you see, as a duty lawyer, you're coming into contact with a lot of people who have been taken into custody for the first time, and explaining concepts like bail and remand, charge. So it's a really challenging job. I loved it. I love it. I still love it. It's a really rewarding job, but it's very, very challenging. Again, I really recommend this, particularly for people who are considering being a career in crime. It doesn't sound right. Once this COVID-19 stuff is over, and I'm sure it will be over one day, everyone should go and sit in the magistrate's court, in your local magistrate's court, and have a look at what goes on there, and ask the court staff to point out who the duty lawyer is, and just kind of watch them in court. It's an interesting process to watch. I really encourage people to do it.
Absolutely. And so I guess from where you are now, what are 3 lessons you would share with yourself if you were to see yourself as a law student today?
There's so many lessons I'll try and tell myself. I think the first one that came to mind, and I mentioned this to my wife just before, I said the importance of relationships. I think this was something that people told me a lot when I was a law student, and I didn't really understand what it meant. I kind of just interpreted it as networking, and networking gets a pretty bad rap. Like, networking in my mind as a law student was just a polite way of talking about nepotism. But actually, relationships are so important in the law, and your reputation is really important in the law. Particularly in criminal law, where you spend a lot of your time in court, and you form really close bonds with your colleagues, and also with the people that you meet along the way. So I think the advice I'd give to myself as a law student is keep in mind that when you go and volunteer at a community legal centre, the connections you're making there, the connections you make with your lecturers, the connections you're making with your classmates, and I know that's really hard at the moment in these online times, will really be the relationships that are going to support you through your career. And it's not about impressing someone at a cocktail party, because I think that's what most people think of when they think of networking. It's being able to demonstrate to a colleague that you are a hard worker and that you're competent. And so when someone asks them down the track, do you know Michael Haralambous? Is he a spud? And they'll be like, no, he's all right. He's a hard worker. So that's what I would try and encourage everyone to do, is really respect the relationships of the people you're around. So that's the first one. You asked me for 3, right?
Yes. It's a good one.
The next one is, and this is so easy to say in hindsight and so difficult in the moment, but just don't worry about your grades. Like, I spent so much of my law degree obsessing about every grade. Monash University, where I went, had a fixation with 100% exams. I tied myself in knots. I was so stressed. I think if I had actually just engaged with the course material and gone into it being like, I want to learn something about corporations law, now I'm in situations where I wish I did know or did pay attention in corporations law. But at the time, I was just so fixated on passing that I think I missed the point of so much of my law degree. And I think if I could go back and focus on the course material and take advantage of the lecturers and the other students around me in terms of learning from them and building relationships. I think that's what I would do now if I went back and studied law again. One time in my career that someone's had a conversation with me about my academic transcript. I've been extremely fortunate to get most of the jobs that I've applied for, or at least get interviews. And, my academic transcript isn't crash hot. I got 51 in corporations law. That's a pretty good example. So, just don't stress about grades. No one cares that much. I think it's just try and find something you enjoy and focus on gaining knowledge, because that's what you'll regret at the end of it if you don't. What else? Last thing. The other thing, I think this is probably getting a bit of an insight into me as a law student. I was a bit of a hot mess. I was very anxious. It's all going to be okay. Like, I think is a really important message. Law school, at least my law school, I can't really speak for RMIT, but certainly Monash was extremely competitive. This vibe about it that, everyone was competing for a really small number of jobs and everyone had to kind of climb over each other to get the clerkships and all the rest of it. And if you missed out on the clerkship, that was it. You were going to be unemployable. Might as well have gone to work at Macca's, which is fine, by the way. Macca's is great. It's all going to be okay. I think you can lose sight of, you can lose perspective of how good a position a law degree sets you up for when you graduate. There are so many different pathways to get to where you want to go. The biggest challenge is knowing where you want to go and finding things you're passionate about. And so put your energy into finding things you're passionate about, and don't put your energy in, stressing about getting that one job, because, jobs are stepping stones. And if you know where you find a way to make that happen. I think an example that really highlights that is Riley, who's my colleague at the CIJ. We had totally different pathways to get to where we are. We both have the exact same job title. She didn't practice. She went into consulting. She worked in the fashion industry. She had a completely different pathway, but we both ended up at the Centre for Innovative Justice doing very similar work. And the fact that we have different perspectives is really rewarding, and we can kind of share some of the different perspectives that we've gained on our pathway. So there's a tendency, at least there was for me, to have this all or nothing attitude about all the opportunities that you get post law school and during law school. And it's really tempting to buy into that, but it's all going to be okay. Just put some energy into thinking about what you want to do, and I guarantee it, your law degree is going to put you in a much better position than most people to get there.
Fantastic. That's really good advice. Thanks, Michael. I'm going to throw it to the floor to see if there are any questions. If you have any questions, feel free to type it into the chat box. Or you could just unmute and also ask Michael yourself.
Do you think employers prefer certain graduates from, say, for example, Monash University than Deakin? Because I heard that employability perceptions are really influencing who gets what job.
Hi, Sarah. Thanks for the question. Look, I don't really buy into that. I mean, I think that's easy for me to say. I guess I come from Monash, and people might roll their eyes at me saying that what law school you went to doesn't matter. But in my experience across all of the different places I've worked, I've had people from every law school in Victoria, and just because they went to Deakin didn't mean that. Actually, some of the best colleagues that I've had went to Deakin and VU and La Trobe and RMIT. My gosh, the other lawyer who worked. So the lawyer I worked under on the coronal inquest was an RMIT grad. and he's gone on to work for Robinson Gill, which is the plaintiff law firm that runs all of the police abuse matters. And if you pay attention to those types of matters, you'll see them in the Age quite regularly, and it's his clients. So I think it's just one of those things that's a favourite of those meme pages online to kind of bash up on the differences between particular law schools. And I think it's one of the lesser of the things that that employers take into account. That's been my experience. Obviously, I'm coming from the community law perspective, but yeah, hopefully that answers your question.
Yeah, I echo that. I think. Sorry, go, Sarah.
Oh, no, I heard that. I was just going to say that I'm glad to hear that, because I was just worried, that some people, like some graduates, might be preferred over others.
No, and I think that comes back to what I was saying about why relationships are so important. The thing that they're going to look at on your resume is who your referee is. Like, what type of work experience you've had up until now. The fact that you've got a law degree is just like, okay, they've got a law degree, they're qualified to apply for this job. It's all the other things in your resume that they look at. So taking advantage of things like the clinical placement opportunities that RMIT offer is a really great way of building some of those networks if you don't have them already. So yeah, don't stress.
I think your last point for the advice that you gave yourself also rings true to that, Michael, how you were saying if you just stick to, you will get there. It's a stepping stone. Jobs are a stepping stone. And if you focus on what you are interested in and what's important to you, even if your first job's not the first job that you want, you'll get there. And I think that's really salient to that point. Don't be worried about what employers are looking for. It's what you want really, and you'll end up there as long as you stick to that. Were there any other questions?
Yeah, I've got one just quickly for Michael. I currently work with the Aboriginal Legal Service in WA. I've been placed remotely over here, as well as in working with NAJA in Darwin. So wow. I've just got a question about doing duty lawyer work, because one of my biggest concerns, I think, when I first started was the nerves about, well, how are you going to know what you're doing? And you go from finishing off uni to going and representing people in court. How did you deal with those nerves, and what perspective, looking back at that in hindsight, about the nerves you might have had?
Yeah, I think that was a close contender for career challenges. Was the first appearance work that I ever did. It's so nerve-wracking. I think the way some advice that someone gave me when I was starting out appearing in court, I had lots of different advice. There's two people.
Oh, did we lose Michael there? Wait 1 second.
Pieces of advice that were really good. One was that
Is he breaking up you as well, and Jeanette? Yep.
Yeah, he's breaking up.
Okay. Wait a sec. Michael, sorry, we're just going to have to get you to start on that.
Michael!
He'll come back. Wait a sec. Well, there's a bit of movement there. Michael, can you hear us? Oh, wait, it's just muted himself. Michael, can you hear us?
Meilin, while I've got you here, some of us can't use the chat box because we're not members of the chat.
Good one. Thank you for letting us know. Yeah, okay, not a problem. I'll keep that in mind for next time. And I think Michael's just going to try and re-enter the. But yeah, thank you for that. That's good to.
Thank you.
Join. Here we go. Here we go. Hi, Michael. How are you going?
So I've just switched to my phone because I'll try my 3G instead.
Not a problem. So you were at 2 points. You're going to give us two things that your friend had told you.
Yeah, so one of them was that the person behind you would be much more nervous.
Sorry, wait 1 second. You're
Can't
not
hear you.
quite clear.
What about now? Is that better?
Perfect.
Way
Okay.
better.
The first piece of advice was the person behind you is going to be a lot more nervous than you are. And that wasn't particularly helpful because I was still really nervous. And I was like, oh, they must be super nervous.
So the person behind you being the person you're representing?
Yeah, that's right. Your client. And the other piece of advice was that when you're in court, you're just solving a problem. You're having a conversation with the magistrate because there's an issue and everyone wants the issue to be solved. And so you're just there to explain what the issue is in the plainest possible terms. And if you do that and you approach it with that attitude, it just kind of demystifies it a lot. I think a lot of people go in with all these haughty-taughty words and they want to look like something from Boston Legal and they get a bit lost. But actually, the really effective advocates are the best communicators because they walk into the courtroom and they solve a problem. And that helped me conceptualize what a courtroom is and really helped me when I was starting out. So yeah, hopefully that helps you. But yeah, what great experience working for Alswa. That's, yeah, really fantastic people in that organisation.
Yeah, it's brilliant. Really great. Thank you for the advice.
That's okay.
Are there any other questions?
Yeah, I'm echoing, so I feel a bit weird. I really, really want to get into the type of, or the career path that you have, Michael. But I'm kind of at the point where I feel like I don't even want to finish my degree because I'm already burnt out. How do you kind of keep going?
I think it's really hard. And I think there was definitely stages when I went through a similar thing, particularly when I was working full time and studying. It was really hard to see the forest from the trees. I think something that helps me, just harking back to the career challenge, because this is something, feeling burnt out is not something that goes away when you graduate. Something that helps me when I'm feeling a bit lost in terms of my career or otherwise is keeping a journal and just kind of finding a page and writing down the things that I'm grappling with as a way of taking them out of my head and just writing them down, knowing that they're recorded somewhere, and then a week later going back and reading them. And if I'm having a recurring issue, it's just a good way of having a dialogue with yourself that isn't wholly internal. I find that kind of helpful. But yeah, I think it's dealing with burnout and particularly at the moment where we don't have so many access to so many things that help us manage and cope, like, going on hikes is something that I like to do. I can't do that at the moment. Yeah, it's really hard. So I don't have all the answers, but something that I used and continue to use is keeping a journal. And I think that's a really useful thing.
Cool, thank you.
But stick at it. Yeah, I mean, it's really worth it in the end,
Yeah, I could just work what I'm doing for the rest of my life.
Are there any? We'll take one more question. If there's another question, please go ahead.
I am studying my first year at RMIT, and the degree that I'm doing is a Bachelor of Legal and Dispute Studies, but it's actually not really, it does all of the units that you need for an LLB, but it's not classified as an LLB. So Michael, what you were saying before, you don't have a JD.
No, I have a LLB and BA, so Bachelor of Arts, Bachelor of Laws. You need an LLB to be admitted. It's one of the LLB or a LLM, whatever JD is, to be admitted as a lawyer in Victoria.
So there is that barrier. But in terms of the justice pathway, there at the end of your degree, there are so many ways that you can use that knowledge. Like, I mean, you can go into the bureaucracy. There are so many different career paths that don't require a practicing certificate. So in terms of thinking about what your career could look like afterwards, it requires a bit of creativity, but don't limit yourself to career titles as a lawyer. Think more broadly about, working for corrections, working in government, working in the community sector, in project work, working for consultancy firms. All of these areas are really going to respect the knowledge that you're gaining in your justice degree. So, but yeah, I don't want to give advice without knowing the specifics, but I'm fairly certain it's not something that you'll be able to be admitted with. Is that right, Helen?
Yeah, I'll answer because I did that degree. It doesn't meet any of the priestly set stuff. So.
But I think RMIT is in the process of going through the accreditation for an undergraduate
LLB. Yeah. There'll be
They
an
have
LLB available next year.
Oh,
Yeah,
sorry. They have their JD, which I plan on doing after completing this, because I was going to go to Melbourne, but the way that they structure their law degree is you have to do a degree first before you do law anyway. So it was going to take the same amount of time. So that was kind of like where I was at in that headspace.
That's how it is at RMIT at the moment. Yeah, you can't do a Juris Doctor without doing an undergrad.
Yeah, I think it's like that for everywhere though, I'm pretty sure.
Yeah, it's like some places do still offer the undergrad law degree, the LLB, but like Monash and Melbourne have moved to just the Juris Doctor with an undergrad first.
Yeah, sucks that it's not covered by HECS though.
Well, RMIT has more CSP places which are covered by HECS than Melbourne and Monash, which only have a couple.
Cool, thanks Heidi. And thank you, Michael, by the way, for helping me out.
Thanks, Michael, for pointing out I'm mute. I'm one of those people. Thank you, Michael, again for speaking to us. That was really great advice, and I think your tips on being involved in clinical legal education and also CLCs at an early stage and building those relationships is really good advice. Thank you again, everyone, for attending. If you want to have a chat to me or even want to ask Michael a question offline, I'm sure he's more than happy to. You can just get in touch with me and I can put you in touch with Michael. Thank you again, everyone, and enjoy your afternoon.
Thanks, guys.
Thanks, guys.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Cheers, mate.